Have you ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
You're listening to The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak, connecting the reality of the gospel to the grit of life. You can support the podcast and pick up some sweet Flipside swag at www.patreon.com/Noah Filipiak.
What is up, Flip-Eponymai? Welcome to episode 99 of the Flip Side podcast. Episode 99 ended up turning into episode 99 and 100. So we'll be celebrating our 100th episode here in a moment because I interviewed Dr. David Turner today. We'll give you his bio and the context of our conversation soon. But the conversation was great and wonderful. We had just tons of ground to cover, and it turned into about 2 hours. And so giving you part one today in episode 99, and then we'll give you part two shortly in episode 100. I know it's been a few weeks since I've posted an episode, and I want to cast a little bit of vision on looking at this fall, what I'd like to do with the podcast. I won't take a lot of time because we have a lot of ground to cover with David here in a moment. But what I want to do is I want to make this podcast easier to share, easier to listen to, and I know one of the ways of doing that is having a regular publishing schedule. I want to grow up. I'm 100 episodes in. I want to graduate and grow up a little bit and be a bit more professional in the way we put out episodes. And so if a goal would be one episode a week on a certain day of the week where you could just expect that the Flip Side was going to show up at that time every single week. To do that, I am asking you to support the podcast financially to cover the overhead of that. So we have our Patreon, which we talk about often on here for those that this podcast is a help to. And I'm not just asking you to support. I'm asking you here, if you are interested in weekly Flipside episodes to support, and in doing this also for Patreon subscribers, we would add in a quarterly Q&A Zoom conversation with one of our guests, a popular guest, a guest on an episode that had a lot of interest in it, and then Patreon subscribers would get in on that private Zoom Q&A with that guest. And so to do that, I broke down what the cost would be, just the straight overhead of that. I would like this to be part of my career, going forward, but for now we're just trying to cover our costs, and that is would be $375 a month to cover the cost of editing 4 episodes a month and publishing those. I have someone that does that, the editing and the posting to social media, and then covering those Q&As with guests. And so currently with the Angry Brew sponsorship right behind me, shout out Angry Brew, got my Angry Brew here and my Flipside mug. You can order some Angry Brew at angrybrew.com, 5lakes.com. Use promo code FLIP to get 10% off your order of Chris's Blend or Angry Brew, including that sponsorship and our current Patreon support. Right now we're at $178 a month. So essentially, I need to raise $200 a month from you listeners via Patreon, patreon.com/Noah Filipiak. Head over there and make a monthly contribution, and you'll get some sweet Flipside swag like this Flipside mug. My third favorite podcast is the Flipside. We want the Flipside to still be your third favorite podcast, so we gotta up we're up in the format here, hopefully a little bit in the fall, but just need to cover the expenses for that. So if you could give a monthly amount, that would help us get to that goal. We need to raise $200 a month, and then we can switch over to weekly episodes and the quarterly Q&A with a guest. So let's jump into today's conversation. I want to give you a little bit of context. I'm a graduate of Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids. If you're not familiar, Cornerstone is a small Christian college that I graduated from in 2004. I was there from 2001 to 2004, graduated a year early. My wife graduated in 2005, and I walked with her in 2005 with the class that I came in with, and had a great experience at Cornerstone. I went to Grand Rapids Theological Seminary, which is Cornerstone's seminary, from 2006 to 2009. One of my professors, my New Testament professor, was Dr. David Turner, who I'll be interviewing today. And GRTS has now had a name change called Cornerstone Theological Seminary, and is a shell of what it used to be. And we'll get into some of that here in these conversations. But there's been a lot going on at my school. There's been a lot going on since 2021 that we're going to get into. There is a new president that came in, Gershon Moreno-Riaño. And the school, David will talk about this at the end of Joe Stoll's tenure. The school was trying to be more diverse. It was more diverse. It had more Black students on campus, Latino students on campus. And then there were some efforts made to help Christians learn from different points of view, help Christians learn from different political points of view. And what it sounds like, I was not on campus at the time, but it sounds like from David, who I always want to call Dr. Turner, what it sounds like is there was a big reaction from potentially a donor base, the board, about the campus going in this, because you know the political landscape that's out there, right? The campus becoming woke, and I use the word woke because that's the word used by this conservative, Republican, where the idea being to be Christian is to be conservative Republican. And we talk about some of that. David and I talk about some of that here, and we've talked about that on the podcast before. You can vote however you want, just as long as you don't say to be Christian is to blank with your voting. You can be a Christian Democrat, a Christian Republican, and you have different reasons for that. And let's talk about that. And let's never, ever, ever mix Christianity and politics together where they seem like they're one and the same thing, because that's idolatry and it pushes people away from the gospel, and Jesus was never, ever about that. So this is the swing happening at my school. And not all of you listening have gone to Cornerstone, though some of you have. And I want to first say that this conversation somewhat is a chance for me to get some things off my chest that I've been lamenting. Lament is a real thing. Grief is a real thing. It's heavy. And I've been carrying that around for 3 years and kind of hit a tipping point this last spring. And so David is a great person, very even-keeled to kind of process through some of that with. But you may have never heard of Cornerstone, or you may say, why does this conversation apply to me? Because there's a trend, one, throughout the U.S. of colleges in general and seminaries in general having to shrink and downsize. And in part one of this conversation, that takes up about half of David and I's conversation, is this trend he's been tracking for several years. There's schools closing, schools that he's close to, and that leads into the Cornerstone conversation. But larger than that, there's a trend throughout, and we've talked about Christian nationalism on the podcast before, and there is a trend to combine Christian faith with Republican politics. And again, I'm not, you might say, why is he against Republicans? I'm not against Republicans. I don't share how I vote on here, but trust me, I am not. There's many good Christian reasons to vote Republican, and I think there's many good Christian reasons to vote Democrat. If you want to hear more about politics, listen to Preston Sprinkle and I's conversation a few episodes ago about politics and his new book, Exiles. But my point is, there's this trend. The reaction that happened at my school was when there was an effort made to be more inclusive in the sense of diverse voices that, while certainly not a cookie cutter, and David and I talk about this, but there is a trend amongst, let's say, Black pastors that are at Cornerstone in the urban cohort program, Black students, Latino students, as well as many, many, many white students, right? That would say, hey, there's more than one political view. Can we be exposed to more than one view? And let's have a diverse discussion, which is what Christian higher ed is meant to do and be and help us grow. And I hope that's what your local Christian communities are, not just an echo chamber. And so they started to do that. And when they started to do that, there was this backlash of Cornerstone's going woke, and again, there's so much of this: the woke, the CRT, the DEI, these words that have become boogeyman words. These are boogeyman words, and there's different Christian voices out there, political voices that are saying those are. Flee from those. Those are of Satan. Those are, and I think there's a lot of greed and power behind those things of trying to get political popularity, political sway by sort of making it this us versus them thing that it never should be, it never has to be. So that's a bit beyond the scope of this conversation, but I just want to tell you what's happened at my school. So they brought in a new president who everybody knew because this is his track record at his other places. This is where he is written about nationally, is against talking about CRT, is against talking about systemic racism and how it formed our country, and this sort of new way of thinking thinking and kind of rewriting our history. And David talks about this better than me, more tactfully than me. So please don't hold him to anything I'm saying here. But this way of rewriting our history that sort of glorifies the American founding of our country, particularly from white colonization, and I won't get into all of it here, but this is the swing. This is happening in our country. That's why I say this. It affects all of us because we have to, you as a listener has to think critically and say, where's Jesus in this? How much of this has an agenda behind it for political power, and how, and the gospel's been co-opted, the gospel's been hijacked and used to get power, to get money, has been used to get influence in the political sense and votes and those sorts of things. So that's what's happening at my school. They were going woke, is what the one particular Facebook comment that I mentioned in the interview said. They're going woke, and so they're praising the new leadership for basically eradicating all wokeness from campus, and that's what's happened over the last 3 years. Lots of censorship about what's allowed to be said and not allowed to be said. Loyalty oaths about not speaking out against this new direction that marries politics with Christianity. So that gives you some context of what's happening. So I want to introduce, or lead into part one here of our conversation, David Turner and I's conversation. We talk about, from a macro level, what's happening in seminaries and Christian colleges for the first half of today's part one conversation. And then the second half of today, we'll get into recent cuts made to Cornerstone's humanities and music departments and how those cuts were done unethically and then sort of lied about and covered up and not taken accountability for. So that's kind of a bit of today's conversation. And then that'll spur you into part two, which will be episode 100. And then that will get into more of the kind of abusive leadership and what that looks like in an institution. And some of that's in today as well. And then also this episode 100, part two, will get into the marriage of Christianity and politics and this agenda and what's kind of really behind all this. So it's a lot. But again, this is a result of 3 years of grieving and lament and a tipping point this spring where many of my friends friends of mine were really, really hurt. And friends of mine were really, really hurt in 2021. Lives wrecked, careers completely derailed in really unethical, unchristian ways, and it's wrong. And so when somebody doesn't take accountability for that or admit to sin when they've been confronted on it, and there's doubling down and tripling down and quadrupling down, and as a pastor and someone who is in leadership, I have to at some point say something. And Dr. Turner, I think, feels the same. Says it differently than me, but we're both in similar boats there. So let me read you Dr. Turner's bio, and then we'll jump into part one of this conversation. Dr. David Turner began teaching at Grand Rapids Baptist Seminary in 1986. I was 3 years old at that time. Later named Grand Rapids Theological Seminary, where he retired in 2018. David is an ordained minister and has served as a pastor and an interim pastor at 4 churches. Before coming to Grand Rapids, he taught at Baptist Bible College of Pennsylvania and Grace Theological Seminary. Currently, he serves as scholar in residence for New Testament studies at Puritan Reformed Theological Seminary in Grand Rapids. He's published 2 commentaries on Matthew and a monogram on Jesus and the Jewish leaders in Matthew 23. His latest book, Interpreting the Gospels and Acts, was published by Kriegel Publications in their Handbooks for New Testament Exegesis series. He blogs at drdavidlturner.com. Before I jump in, a couple other notes. I think I mentioned this. I was at Cornerstone 2001 to 2004. I got my degree at GRTS 2006 to 2009, but then I did go back to GRTS in 2018 and 19 and was taking some credits for a future degree that I thought I was going to do that I didn't do. But I got a chance to take classes with this new wave of professors, which was really refreshing. And all of them are gone now too, either fired because of this new regime or left because of the injustice that happened to their colleagues, and because they just could not put their name behind this new ideology that was being forced upon them. So just a lot of sadness there. But I got the connection both with kind of Dr. Turner and his generation of professors that kind of retired at the same time, and then the new wave as well that were underneath the Dr. Moreno-Riaño. And then last, a few resources we'll mention. Voice of CU, go to Instagram, you can at Voice of CU, also voiceofcu.wordpress.com. You'll want to check that out. And then there's another Instagram at Cornerstone Journalism that's in a similar vein as well. So let's jump into part one of this conversation with Dr. David Turner.
Ever heard the sound of freedom? Have you ever heard the sound of
Well, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. David Turner to the Flip Side podcast. It's hard to call you David still. I still always think of you as Dr. Turner, but I'm going to do my best. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you. Great to be with you. I'm happy to be called David. People call me Dr. Turner all the time, and I say I'm not that kind of doctor, so don't take 2 aspirin and call someone else in the morning. So
Nice.
great.
I'm going to try to forgive you for the Ohio State mug and apparel that's behind you. For those not watching on YouTube, we're going to try to forgive that here, but you are a Cincinnati Reds fan, which I am as well. So we'll let those two things cancel themselves out. But for any listener where the Buckeye apparel in the background might be a distraction or a stumbling block, I want to, hopefully allow them to be able to continue watching this without immediately turning it off.
Well, the what is it? It's Isaiah about the lion lying down with the lamb and all that.
That's right.
The unity that we have in Christ. No
Amen.
Jew, Gentile, no Wolverine, no Buckeye, all one in Christ. Let's go with that.
I like that. Well, David, I'm looking forward to this conversation with you. Not to the content of it. The content of it is very sad for me. It's a lament. This is a lament conversation, but it needs to be had. But I appreciate having it with you. You've always been someone who's very even keeled, and which is why I appreciated your blog series where you started talking about some of the things happening at Cornerstone and GRTS. Because for me, I'm a pretty not even keeled person. I tend to be really emotional, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. I just can get pretty passionate about things. And so I just really appreciate your level-headedness on this. And I think it's going to be really helpful. And I've shared some of this in the show intro, but I want to kick off, as you and I start our conversation with, for me, the conversation that we're going to have about Cornerstone, my alma mater. So I graduated undergrad in 2004. I was at Seminary from 2006 to 2009 with you, graduated in 2009. And then I went back to get some additional credits. I was in Seminary from 17 to 19 and at GRTS from 18 to 19 with some of those credits. And so got to meet a lot of the new professors, and that sort of thing, which was pretty cool. But there's a personal lament for me of what's happening at CU. There is no more GRTS. It's now Cornerstone Theological Seminary. But also as a Christian, and I see some shifts and some dangerous directions and trends. And I just want to share with listeners, and I want to give you a chance. I want to say for myself, and then give you a chance to say for you why you're having this conversation. I want to say first and foremost, I love Cornerstone. I loved my time there. I loved my time at GRTS, and I still love Cornerstone. And so this conversation for me is out of love. And there's friends of both of ours that have been severely hurt by what's happened at the school in the last few years with just massive faculty firings, being pushed out, people leaving, the kind of, we can label it different things, but I'm curious your labels on what's happened, but an environment that has been very scary for people to work in, and has really derailed people's lives as well. And so my heart is heavy with that. with friends of mine that have been really affected by that. But I also see a trend away from Scripture. I see a trend away from some of the tenets of our faith, and I must resist it. I must sound an alarm, pray for accountability and change. And for you, in one of your recent, at one of the posts you've been posting over the last few years, you said dissent is an obligation. And I'm wondering if you could explain what you mean by that. Dissent is an obligation, and anything you'd want to add to my list just about why we're having this conversation today.
Well, thanks, Noah. It's a privilege to sit in on your podcast today and to have this conversation. Like you said, it's not a conversation you really want to have. For me, I guess I feel an obligation to stay in touch with the students that I've had through the years, who, frankly, 80 to 90% of my salary was paid by their tuition. So they supported me through the years, and together we explored the scriptures, and I tried to help them develop skills so that once they left the seminary, they could continue. So I have a sense that, 2 Timothy 2:1-2, passing on the Christian tradition to people who will be able to teach others. And those others will pass it on to people who will be able to teach others. And it never ends. If it ends, the church is finished. I feel an ongoing obligation to alumni of the school. The term that I hear today for people like them and other supporters, constituents who give and pray for the school, or, they use the term stakeholders. So I feel that's my community. Those are the people that I'm obliged to continue relating to with what God has given me. I don't feel an obligation to any particular administration of the school. I don't feel an obligation to Cornerstone University as some sort of a sanctified outfit that is forever holy in my mind. Schools come, schools go. It's a hard reality. Mm-hmm. Jesus promised to build the church. He didn't promise to build any particular local assembly or any particular academic institution. So, I don't want to be mean and nasty and ugly to Cornerstone. I still recommend people go there. I've done that twice just in the last couple weeks, actually. So loyal dissent, I think, is an obligation just out of one's conscience, one's loyalty to the truth. Obviously, there are different perception of what is the biblical view of these things, but I feel I need to express mine.
Yeah, thank you. I thought we could start with some of the macro of what's going on in Christian higher education. You started blogging about these things a couple years ago at your website, drdavidturner.com. And, this hits close to home. We were just talking about Hebrew Union closing yesterday, and you can share about, your experiences there. You mentioned recently Clark Summit University, which I always knew as BBC, Baptist Bible College, and Clark Summit closing this year. My youth pastor attended there. We would go there every summer for Teen Leadership Conference. That was one of the highlights of my summer as a high schooler. Lots of friends from my youth group attended there, and the camp I worked at, lots of staff from there. So sad stuff that's happening. Can you talk through, before we get to Cornerstone, and some of the ways that potentially they're trying to navigate these challenges? What are some of the shifts or trends that are happening in Christian higher ed over these past few years?
Yeah. First, a moment of shameless self-promotion. My website is drdavidlturner.com.
Oh my goodness, did I get that wrong? Oh, the L is so hidden in there. I had it right here. Thank you, David.
I had to put that L in there because David Turner was already taken, and I put the DR on the front, actually, because David Turner was already taken.
I got you. Thank you. We'll have that in
drdavidlturner.com.
I'll have it in the show notes, and I haven't recorded the intro yet, so I'll be sure to say it correctly in the intro. So thank you.
Whatever. Yeah, I started teaching at the college level when I was still 26 years old, which I was too dumb to realize I wasn't ready to be a prof yet. So I don't blame myself. I blame the people who hired me. But Beverly and I went to Clark Summit in the fall of 1976. And if you look at my website, you'll see several of the students that I had that first year are commenting there on the demise of the school. BBC is what I called it too. It was BBC of PA. And they had another thing called the School of Theology at the time that Dr. Pickering had just started. So we have great memories there. And just yesterday, I was asked by someone about what's the status at Hebrew Union in Cincinnati. Hebrew Union College is the oldest Jewish institution of higher learning in the United States. It began in 1875. Began in Cincinnati because at that time, Cincinnati was, they thought it was going to be what Chicago became. And, Cincinnati is a great town. I love it. I love the baseball team. I was born about 90 miles east of there out in the sticks in Chillicothe. As we say it where I'm from, Chillicothe, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Nice. Love it.
So that's my roots. So I love Hebrew Union. It was a wonderful experience that I had there in the interfaith fellowship program. All my tuition was paid by Jewish people who valued that sort of interfaith discussion. So I was able to study the Bible and rabbinics and the Mishnah and Josephus and Philo and all of that as background for my main interest in the New Testament. And that school is also in the throes of downsizing, right-sizing. Basically, they're shutting down the Cincinnati campus as an academic center. I think they still want to use it for conferences and things, but the second or third largest Jewish library in the world sits there. And Hebrew Union has tried to operate campuses in LA and New York City and Jerusalem, in addition to Cincinnati. And I think for whatever reason, the Cincinnati campus has become somewhat expendable. So this is problematic. This indicates, all over the world there are schools that are having trouble, not just Christian schools, Jewish schools, secular schools. The demographics of college age young people are decreasing. Many people are saying, why would I want to spend six figures for an education, and when I get my degree, I can't get a job? So there's the micro crowd that wants everybody to learn a skilled trade, become an electrician, become a carpenter, become a welder, and you can, as soon as you do your 6 months course, you can make $100,000 a year at it. I think that's fine. I'm no great advocate that everybody has to go to college, but these are all factors that are affecting all kinds of higher ed schools, not just Christian schools, and it's all exacerbated by COVID and the proliferation of online institutions where you can sit in your mother's basement in your pajamas and go to school rather than paying a lot of money to live in someone else's building and eat someone else's food. It's understandable.
Yeah.
So
what with these schools that are closing and or shifting, right? The educational landscape is shifting. What concern is that for the church when you look at Christian higher ed? So what role does Christian higher ed play in the church? So I'm talking Christian colleges and seminaries, particularly seminaries, yes, but then Christian colleges are sort of feeders for the seminaries. What role have seminaries played throughout church history, and what's the concern there with this trend that we're seeing?
Yeah. Well, I think my concern would be just the disintegration of community, the lack of meaningful peer learning communities. Um, Students can go to school, by themselves, watching videos, and not ever really rub elbows with their classmates. So that has to impact the church, I think, at least two levels. The first one, I think, academically, is that by and large, I'm speaking in very general terms here, many people experience online education without really learning to think critically. The assignments are very isolated one from the other. You do a little task, you check that box, you check a couple more boxes. You have to make a comment on a chapter you read in a book or a video you watched, and you have to respond to two other people who made comments. So you have a little discussion thread there. And then you take a little multiple choice quiz, then you move on to next week's assignment. And so it's very difficult for critical thinking to be exemplified and practiced there. I'm not saying that there aren't good online classes that do incorporate a level of critical thinking. I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of inquisitive students that learn a lot in online programs. But I think it's easier to slide through and get your B and do that, a dozen times, and sooner or later you have a diploma to hang on your wall, and you haven't really entered into meaningful critical thinking or meaningful learning with your peers, because you're sitting at home with your computer and you're not really talking things over with your buddies after class. So that has to affect the church, I think, in terms of the quality and depth of the teaching that will come from that sort of thing. To my mind, it almost has to be more shallow by and large. Again, there are exceptions. I'm not saying that everybody who has an online degree didn't get a good education or that they're a shallow thinker. There are exceptions. I'm saying, by and large, other things being equal, the product is not as good. And so you have folks who are not as academically well-versed, and you have folks who have not had the rich experience of getting to know other people who are training to join some form of Christian ministry. Mm-hmm. So you have people who are not perhaps as socially developed as they might have been in a traditional setting. So I think those two areas would be the first two things that come to mind. I'm sure there's lots of others.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful, because I think we often don't think about the ramification of this. If there's less, even if there's less students as a whole, these schools are closing. Does that mean there's going to be less pastors, less qualified pastors, and all those sorts of things? But I love what you brought up about critical thinking. Well, I think we'll get into some of that a little bit more with the shifts going on at Cornerstone, where one of the things higher education is supposed to do is teach you to think critically and put you in a classroom with a professor that you can wrestle through things with and ask difficult questions with, and have classmates, that have differing views and learn and stretch, rather than just, being told what to think. And I think that's even easier to do, maybe in an online, setting where you're just being kind of taught like one way video kind of teaching and things like that. Let's get into some of that in a little bit. I want to ask you about, as we look at these schools closing, and I think some of what Cornerstone's doing is the way they're communicating it. It's a reaction to some of these financial crises that are going on. And so I want to ask you, it's two questions. You can take them separate or take them together. What money, sorry, I'm reading my question wrong. How does money versus mission play a role? So how does money play a role in Christian higher ed versus mission? And with mission, what do you think the mission of a Christian higher ed institution should be?
Okay, can I drop back just a moment to the previous question? I sort of left that after taking a shot. I don't think it was a cheap shot, but it was indeed a shot at online education. There is a approach today that is sort of coming alive called competence-based theological education. There's competence-based programs in many other studies, but I've written about competence-based theological education a couple of times on the website. And there's a new book that Kriegel put out on it that I haven't had a chance to look into carefully yet. But the beauty of that approach is that it does utilize, in many cases, online studies and personal synchronous relationship with a professor, but the student is in his or her local church and being mentored by the pastor in their local church, pastors perhaps in their local church. So it's not simply an academic thing, which can be done online. It is at the same time working in terms of spiritual formation with a trusted pastor, and also in ministry practice, learning just how to get a Sunday school lesson together. So each academic step in the program is tied to how does it change you personally? How do you grow in your life with Christ? And how do you minister in light of these truths? So I think there's a lot to say about it. The only school I know about in our area here in the Midwest that's doing it is my alma mater, Grace College and Seminary, Winona Lake, Indiana. Now, you were asking about the question of mission. What is the mission of a Christian college? There are all different kinds of Christian colleges. Many of them developed out of Bible institutes, which became seminaries, which were trying to find students who had undergrad degrees so they could grant a master's level degree. And so they started a college. I think that's the way it was at Cornerstone originally. I think that's the way it was down at Grace in Indiana originally. So you have schools that began in a very modest way of just having an opportunity for lay folk to learn how to be effective Sunday school teachers or youth leaders, and it gradually evolves into a higher level of education for ministry practice. And you have schools like this getting state approval to grant degrees, often starting out as a graduate school, and then a Bible Institute, Bible College prep for the graduate school. So you have all different kinds of schools just to refer to what many of us know as BBC of PA, Clark Summit University now, or then it's in process of closing. That school began as a Bible Institute. They became, even though they were called a seminary, they were an undergrad institution. And they were strictly related to ministry, education for ministry practice, pastors, missionaries, Christian school teachers, and all the variations that relate to that. That was their goal. And as they experienced decline in student enrollment, they attempted to broaden their mission and become a Christian liberal arts college, which I think is sort of a losing battle. I don't know how you can hire a lot of new faculty to teach other classes and start new programs, how that is a winning thing financially. It seems like for a while that's going to be a losing thing financially. And apparently that's what they experienced. So now they're going to close the school. So, there's different kinds of Christian schools, Christian liberal arts colleges, which have vocational programs with that. Those types of schools, I think, are basically founded on some concept that would be implied by the famous quote from Abraham Kuyper, that there's no part of the universe that Christ doesn't look at and say it's mine. And so there's this passage in 2 Corinthians where Paul speaks of taking every thought captive to the lordship of Christ. And you sort of take it out of context to apply it to higher education, but I think it's something of an extended application. But I think it's true to the original meaning of the passage. So it's Christian worldview. There's a fancy German word for it called Weltanschauung, and that just means world life view, perspective on the world. If I think one of the Greek philosophers said, "If you will give me a place to stand, pusto, give me a pusto, and I can move the world if I just had leverage." So a Christian college ought to be giving its students leverage to be salt and light in the world, to engage their chosen professions with Christian foundation and awareness of their calling to represent Christ to people in whatever profession they choose.
When we start talking about money, and you've talked about this on your blog series, and I see some of the changes going on at Cornerstone right now. Some of them, I think there's 3 stories. I think there's, and sometimes it seems like the few responses I've seen from Cornerstone, the only one they're responding to is the money question. But just real quick, and I would like to kind of frame this out where we get to all 3 of these in our conversation. There is the story of these, like, schools are closing, like we've been talking about. There's this trend in Christian higher ed. Schools are trying to figure out how to stay open. So they're going to these more online, they're bringing in adjunct faculty that they don't have to pay as much. And so Cornerstone just cut their humanities department, or 6, faculty from humanities and music department. We'll talk about some of that. And their response is like, we weren't making money on it. We weren't making money on it, and we're going to invest money in these programs where, there's more students come in. So we'll talk about that. I think that's one layer. There's 2 more layers that I want us to get to, with some of the political, theological agenda going on at Cornerstone, as well as I don't know the right framework for it, but the bullying leadership style that's been in place of, there. I want to talk about that too. But let's start talking about with money as we talk about the mission of Christian higher ed. I mean, it's not to make money. It's not to be to make a profit. Certainly you have bills to pay and things like that. The mission is like the mission of a church, right? It's to develop, and it's certainly different for a school, but it's to develop God's kingdom. It's to develop, there's these values that are going to go into a mission of a school. Like you might say, my relationship with you, because I was in class with you and had a relationship with you, as a mentoring sort of relationship, that's part of the mission of a school, versus, an online program or an adjunct sort of program where professors are coming and going, doesn't match necessarily, the mission of a school. And so you've written on that a bit. Can you talk a bit about money and just like what place that should play in a school as they're looking at making some of these choices, and when they make choices, what do you think the framework should be for some of these major kind of choices that schools have to make?
Yeah. Well, as I was reflecting on this and reading some about it, I learned that educators speak of this thing called the iron triangle. So you have these three things that all education has to deal with. The first is you need more students. The second is you need better programs. And the third thing is you need to spend less money to do it. So it's impossible really to get more students into better programs all the while spending less money. It can't really be done. So the financial side of things is, there are certain expenses any traditional educational institution has. If it has a campus, it has to keep the lights on. It has to heat the building. You have to have dorms for students to live in. You have to hire a resident faculty. And the faculty side of things is typically the first to go, because you can, to the extent that you wish, teach classes by hiring what is termed as adjunct faculty. Sometimes regular adjunct faculty who are like employed by a school consistently. Sometimes they're called affiliate faculty. But typically, these types of faculty are paid sometimes as low as $2,000, maybe as high as $3,000, $3,500 for teaching a class. So I've done that before, and I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, but it becomes a bad thing when schools, in order to save money, lessen the amount of faculty who are career faculty, who are in what's called tenure track, who are counting on being profs. That's their calling in life. So when these folks are hired, there needs to be a fringe benefit package. There needs to be perks. So some sort of retirement program, perhaps some sort of life insurance. Someone's got to set up the Social Security program and all that. And you've got to have a building that has room for an office, which you have to heat and light. So it's a lot more expensive to hire people who have dedicated their lives to learn and to teach and to be lifelong learners in a discipline, because they feel called to introduce students to the beauty, to the intricacies of whatever their discipline is. So schools think, well, I'm paying, and profs don't get paid a lot at most schools, most Christian schools especially. I don't think I ever made $75,000 in my whole time at Cornerstone. That would be at the end. I don't think I ever got that high even. So it's not like they're paying faculty a huge salary, but it's a lot cheaper for them to just get adjunct faculty to come in, whom they don't have to contribute toward retirement or health insurance or anything, and they can pay them $3,000 to teach a class. So, if you are trying to make a living as an adjunct prof, good luck, because maybe you are teaching more or less a full load 6 or 8 classes a year, but you're getting paid maybe $25,000 tops to do it. So you're a bivocational person if that is your thing. So schools save money. Students sometimes learn about something, maybe an upper level elective class where you're studying some specific aspect, say in business, and you want to go into banking, so you have a class related to finance. So the school has a Christian banker come in and teach the class. Well, that's fantastic, because this person hopefully is academically qualified, but every day they do the work, so they can model to students what's really going on out there in that discipline. But when all of your classes from 101 classes on up are taught by adjuncts, not to say that there aren't faithful adjuncts who do a good job, but when you don't have people who are dedicating their lives to that type of teaching, I think the quality has to go down overall.
Yeah. What's your, I just wanted to bring this up because we'll start talking about more of the specifics of what's going on at Cornerstone. And there's several, the Voice of CU is a new Instagram page at Voice of CU. It's also voiceofcu.wordpress.com, where it sounds like an anonymous alumni is trying to hold the school accountable and the president accountable. And prior to Voice of CU, it doesn't seem active anymore, but there was an Instagram page, Cornerstone Journalism, which is where I got this from, and they got it from public record tax filings from ProPublica is what they cited. Cornerstone's new president as of 2021, which is really kind of this era that we're looking at, Gershon Moreno Riaño. He is making $332,681 for his salary. And then Cornerstone Journalism also showed in Joe Stoll's final year, he was there X amount of years or whatever. I forget how many years Stoll was there, but in his final year, Stoll made $195,266. And I believe he said he started out at much lower than that. I think maybe around 125 or so in his first year. But then we hear about cutting faculty and moving to adjunct and all these sorts of things. I sort of I swallow that a little bitterly, like that's the 332,000, and while you're slashing everybody else's, jobs, and you've taken almost I mean, maybe not quite a double pay raise from the previous president. You're my even keeled friend. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, two things. Well, three things. First, I'll just say I agree with you. I'm not so even keeled when it comes to the disparity between administrative and faculty salaries in many institutions, and I doubt it's all that different with the state supported schools. I don't know about that. It's not my world, but I'm guessing there's huge disparities there too. Second, I think it's a bit misleading to compare Dr. Stoll's salary to Dr. Gerson Moreno Riano's salary, because I think part of Joe's salary, I'll just call him Joe. I think of him as a friend, so I'll just use his first name. He's not a friend that we always agreed on everything with, and to his credit, Joe listened to me harangue him on lots of issues through the years. But I think part of Joe's salary was viewed as housing allowance. And I think if you look at the ProPublica page or other websites where you have that information on the tax form, you'll see there was other compensation listed alongside his salary. And I don't remember the specifics of it, but I don't think the disparity is quite as much as it appears. Third thing would be, if you look back, I think the 330 figure for Dr. Moreno Riano was 2023, and I think 2022 his salary was like 210. So it appears that they gave him a 50% increase between those 2 years. So I don't know. Have you ever gotten a 50% raise, especially when your job wasn't exactly thriving?
Right. And there's other.
I don't know how. I'm just a lowly professor. What do I know about the relationship between boards and presidents? So I guess I don't begrudge him that salary. I question the wisdom of a 50% raise, but that's not the issue. The issue isn't how much he makes. The issue is how much he makes in relationship to what other people are making on campus, and on how the school is doing overall.
Yeah.
So it appears from a distance, from my perspective, as a lowly faculty member who was never really given any opportunity to connect with the board members during my whole career at any school that I taught at. The faculty was kept away from the board pretty much by, I would think, administrative design. So it does just seem to me that with things as tight as they were at the school, that's a bit rich to give a 50% increase. But I think we do need to go on to say that the same ProPublica tax records and that you mentioned, if you go back, you can see it going back at least 10 years. Cornerstone routinely had income at the end of their fiscal year. They routinely had $1 million or more that they list as income that they didn't spend. So their budget was consistently in the black. They were not, as Clark Summit was, consistently losing money every year and going deeper into debt every year. They were not. And I think that's probably the only thing they can point to as why they needed to make the drastic change they made recently, is they did it basically to ensure the school's future financial health, as if they were just at the point of starting to really lose a lot of money each year. So they just had to make this decision. The language used to be in the contract, financial exigency was needed in order for them to not retain a tenured faculty member. So in my view, as far as I can read these documents, there was no financial exigency. Neither was there any real emergency. These faculty members who were let go may not have had too many students majoring in their discipline, but they all taught 101 general ed required classes, which would be fairly large classes. So they all had a full dance card. They weren't just sitting around saying, "Well, I don't have to teach much this semester, so I guess I'll I'll go up north and hunt mushrooms in the spring or something." You know, that wasn't happening.
Yeah. Well, and that context is, I think, really helpful when we look at the language. So now for listeners to know, we're talking about recently, as the end of June, and then it would have been, I think it would have been the end of June, where these 6 faculty were cut. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of these details. I believe there also was a seminary dean, and I think one other. And the faculty cut on the undergrad side were all in the humanities department, humanities and music department. And so the language Cornerstone used, the chairman of the board used, I think I read some things you were talking about in one of your articles about the BBC. It might have been on Facebook. I don't remember, because I'm reading lots of people's responses to this. But basically they were saying, look, BBC just closed, Clark Summit just closed. We don't want to be like that. So we have to make these cuts. And then we have to also, pivot, right, these programs and things. And you're making the point here, and like you said there, that the financial situations are very different. And I also then that's where I think bringing up, yes, if our Moreno Riaño got a 50% raise, and meanwhile you're saying, well, we have to make all these budget cuts so we don't end up like BBC. That seems a little sketchy to me. I do want to walk through, and I want to be really clear here. So what's bothersome about the way Cornerstone is messaging these cuts, it's the messaging is, hey, look, this is the direction of undergrad. We have to go towards programs that are growing, like nursing, and they list some others. I forget what they all are now. And so we have to hire these professors. We have to cut these. Okay. And it's a narrative that they're spinning, and I'm seeing kind of their contingency that they're trying to appeal to, their political, perhaps theological contingency that they're appealing to. Are they're buying that? They're like, yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. But the reality is, the Voice of CU has an infographic up where April 1st of this year, these faculty in the humanities department, they were promised employment by board members. May 14th, Cornerstone revises the employee handbook, removing tenure protections. So that's pretty wild that like tenure protections are just removed because a new employee handbook comes out. June 7th, annual contracts are signed. And then June 13th, 6 days later, 6 humanity professors are terminated. This was done via a Zoom call that they had no idea that this was happening. They were literally got on Zoom on June 13th and were fired. And now, here's the thing. You have to find a career job in academia as a professor that you've committed your life to, your PhD, all of your experience. It's now middle to end of June, and you need to find a job before August, when, if the school was truly having these financial issues and it was the reason for making these cuts, it seems like a humane thing to do, let alone a Christian thing to do, would be to tell your faculty in advance, hey, we have to make these cuts. Perhaps you tell them in January or February, so they can be doing a search for these jobs that are not easy to find because of the shrinking higher ed landscape across the country, and give them a chance to reestablish their life rather than lying to them. Let's just be honest, straight up lying to them, which is evil and is a sin, and in telling them, promising them a job, and then having them sign a contract while at the same time changing the handbook behind their back, and then firing them based on this new handbook that you just came up with. So that's some context here. I want to get kind of your thoughts on that. But it feels like Christian leaders and a Christian institution is not acting Christian, and they're not taking any accountability for it, and they're just spinning it in the sense of, oh, we just had to invest in the growing programs and not in the ones that weren't doing well. And it just doesn't address what's actually happening or how it's actually happening.
Yeah. Well, I think the Lord knows their hearts, and they will give account to Him, as we all will, for what they have done as administrators at Cornerstone. And so I'll leave that to the Lord. But it would seem to me that this was not something that an idea occurred to them in June. We need to do this. I think it's a long-term plan, and this is just the latest step in the plan. And as you say, they could have been much more candid, I think, with folks. They might have said, this will be your last contract in the fall, let alone in January. Because told them when they signed the contract, we're going to be scaling back your area. So you need to start looking for another job as you finish your last year here. So the way the hiring cycle works in higher education, most of the time, schools will know they need to hire for the next year in the fall. So this is 24. So this fall, schools that have any needs that they realize they will need to fill in the fall of 25 will be added in the fall of 24. So they'll post ads online in various clearinghouses that list Christian school employment. And it works the same way in non-Christian schools, in state schools. So people will be looking for those ads, watching them like a hawk, because there's a lot more qualified profs out there now than there are jobs in nearly any discipline. So schools will narrow down their list. It was routine for us at GRTS when I served on search committees for us to receive over 100 apps for any given position, and 2/3 of those would be from people who had the requisite qualifications. Some people were just dreaming, and you could get rid of those apps pretty quickly and not give them serious consideration because they weren't really qualified. But you will get, a huge percentage of the numerous apps you get that are from qualified people. So you have to do a lot of work to narrow it down. So you narrow it down to maybe half a dozen people, and you start doing, say, Zoom interviews in the late fall, early spring. You narrow it down to a candidate or two, three maybe, if they all look good, and you'll have on-campus visits, and you'll offer a contract to the person in spring, in March, April, May, something along in there. So these folks who were abruptly terminated, and we could go into the timing of all of that. The faculty handbook has always been the go-to for the terms of the contract. The contract refers to the faculty handbook. The stipulations of the contract in general terms alludes to the specifics of the faculty handbook. The faculty handbook was under revision. They were first asked to sign their contract before they even saw the faculty manual that their contract alluded to. And the contract terms basically say, I've read the faculty manual and I agree to abide by it. But they hadn't even seen it.
Yeah.
So there was a protest, and they were told, okay, you can wait. So when it came out, I think they were given like a month. So the June 7th date was not the day contracts are signed. It was the deadline by which contracts had to have been signed. So people may have signed their contract a few weeks before that. But a week after that is when they were let go. 6 in the undergrad, 2 in the seminary dean, and a theology professor at the seminary. So they might have been fired a week after they signed. Who knows? So they did change the faculty manual, and the whole concept of tenure was radically altered. I think the new faculty manual, you can read this on the Voice of CU website. The faculty manual still refers to tenure, but as I understand it, tenure now is simply a matter of severance. Everybody's an at-will employee, can be fired at any time, but if you've attained tenure, you can get a severance. You can receive whatever. So the school has basically said that the people who were let go received a generous severance. That's a whopper. That, God's their judge. I'm not. Mm-hmm. But consider the fact that you will not have an opportunity even to get a job. If you're let go in May, there's no way you would even have an opportunity to get a new job before fall the next year. So you're talking, I don't know, 14, 15 months anyway.
Yeah.
So your severance is only going to last 3 or 4 months. As I understand it, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think this is the situation. The severance they received was through the fall semester. So they were told in May that they would not be receiving any salary after December, which may, to many people, seem to be a generous severance. But the way it works is you don't have a chance really to even get another job until the next fall, 9 months later. And so they're basically, left hanging. Yeah. And the whole timing thing and the last minute switcheroo on the tenure, the manner in which they were fired by Zoom. And I'm told none of them even received personal thank you letters for their decades of service from the administration or the board. That may be wrong, but I have heard that. That's not a Christian way of treating people. I think we just have to say that.
I agree.
That is a sub-Christian business model. And in the secular world, if people were treated that way, there would be lawsuits. There's no doubt. Whether there will be any lawsuits from this remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. Apparently, the people who were terminated were required to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, in order to receive their severance. So,
does a non-disclosure agreement mean you can never talk about this stuff, or is it for an X amount of time? I mean, first of all, let me just say that was on my list to talk about later. I think the idea of a non-disclosure agreement tells you I don't think that's normal. Correct me if I'm wrong. It feels like this is part of a regime that is trying to keep things locked down and is trying to stay in control and knows there's abuse happening and is unwilling to take any accountability or responsibility for the abuse. And so then is basically bribing people with a non-disclosure agreement to say, we're not going to, generous severance. We're not going to give you your, we're not going to help you if you say anything about us and the abuse that's happening behind the scenes. But I am curious, do they have to take that to their grave, or how does that part work?
Yeah, I don't think it works that way. I mean, I've never had to sign an NDA. I've been through some scrapes through the years, but I've never had to do that. So I don't know how they work. I'm obviously not an attorney, so I'm not that familiar. But I don't think there would be any way they could legally require them not to ever talk about it. I think the point is if you talk about it while you're receiving your severance will be terminated. You won't get any money. That's how I understand it works.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The discussion on Voice of CU at WordPress.com, the Cornerstone alumnus, I'm not sure whether it is a man or a woman who is blowing the whistle there. That person is having a discussion with the spiritual formation VP at the school. At least they were. And I think it may have ended, but I think at least Voice of CU wanted to continue it. I don't know. I haven't looked at that site for a week or two.
Yeah.
I don't know where it stands now. But Voice of CU was speaking to, I believe the gentleman's name is Kevin Hall at the school about it. And he was objecting to describing this whole thing as a firing because it was not due to performance issues or moral issues. So he preferred to say the contract was non-renewed. So if you can look at the timeline and the things we've just discussed and gloss all that over and say their contract was not renewed, that I can in good conscience say that. But part of that discussion was about the NDAs. And so this gentleman from the school was disputing the NDA issue with Voice of CU. So there may be some complexities there that aren't as bad as that. It's not as bad as it sounds. But I tend to doubt it because they were quibbling over using the word firing versus terminated.
Yeah.
Renewal of contract. So they were, I think I wrote this on my website, so I'll say here, I think they were straightening out a gnat and swallowing a camel, ethically.
Heard the sound of freedom. Have you ever heard the sound of freedom?
All right, welcome back. This will be brief. I've talked enough. Just remember to listen to part 2 of this conversation. We just had to cut it off kind of in the middle, and it'll pick right up where we left off on episode 100 of The Flip Side, which will be being published simultaneous to this one. Quick reminder, if you want to see weekly Flip Side episodes and a chance to do Q&A with popular guests from the Flip Side, we need $200 a month more in Patreon support to get to that goal, just to cover the overhead of those costs. That's not me making anything off of that. That's just to break even. So if you can do that, if you want to see that happen, then go to patreon.com/Noah Filipiak. There's different tiers you can give to, or you can give a custom amount, and those gifts are tax deductible as well. That's it for now. This was episode 99. Thanks so much for watching or listening, and I will see you next time on The Flip Side.
The Flip Side with Noah Filipiak is a Beyond Ministries production. Copyright Noah Filipiak. www.noahfilipiak.com. Theme music by Kyle Lake at K-Lake Music. Used with permission. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.
It's time to bring me closer. There's no purgatory, cause you're in or you're out. When you see them in the clouds, then you know it's going down. Raise them, raise them, raise them. They've been sleeping for some ages. Now all God's babies so confused by this hatred. Pulpit preachers shouldn't aim to be A-list. Money probably long, but short is what your days.